From the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., this is Update One, the club's official podcast. It features newsworthy stories originating from the NPC facilities, as well as broader topics related to journalism, communications, press freedom, and transparency.
I'm Adam Cano, co-chair of the National Press Club's broadcast podcast team. The decision by X, formerly known as Twitter, to implement Community Notes, a peer-based system for flagging misinformation, met with initial skepticism and even suspicion. Yet a recent study by my guest and his peers suggests that the so-called crowd-checking does have a chilling effect on authors intent on misleading the public. To discuss this, I'm joined by Huasha Ray, the Xerox Professor of Information Systems and Technology at the University of Rochester's Simon Business School. Full disclosure, I am a University of Rochester alumnus. Professor Ray, welcome to Update One.
Hey, Adam. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what motivated you and your peers at the universities of Illinois and Virginia, as well as your home school of Rochester, to study crowdsourced fact-checking on social media rather than, say, traditional fact-checking methods?
Like many people, I see misinformation as a grave challenge of our time. To be clear, I still think traditional fact-checking is indispensable. It brings more objectivity to traditional media and keeps public figures from making unsubstantiated claims. But there are also problems with traditional fact-checking. One of the biggest problems is scalability. In fact, factcheck.org considers this as its biggest challenge. This is especially true when it comes to fact-checking social media. There are just too many posts, and they come too fast. Now, peer-based fact-checking, or crowd-checking as we call it, is a natural counterpart of traditional fact-checking. I say natural because if you think of social media as a crowd version of traditional media, then crowd-checking can be thought of as a crowd version of traditional fact-checking of anyone and by everyone. We find this idea fascinating, so we started the project back in 2023. By the way, my co-author at University of Illinois is also a Rochester alumnus, and my other co-author at the University of Virginia is actually his former PhD student.
Nice. Can you give us a quick summary of what you found in this research?
Of course. In one sentence, what we find is that peer-based fact-checking, or crowd-checking as we call it, can actually work. Now, before I elaborate on this, let's take a step back and consider the following scenario. Suppose we have a CNN host publicly question whether former President Barack Obama was born in the U.S. Then some third-party fact-checking organization just debunked this claim with tons of evidence. Hypothetically, let's say that CNN host walks back his claim. In this situation, we would say the traditional fact-checking worked, right? Now, in the context of crowd-checking, suppose that CNN host posts his claim on X, formerly known as Twitter, and then some X user writes a note against it. Such a note is initially visible only to crowd-checking participants, not to everyone. But if the note is voted as helpful enough by enough people, then the note would become public. By that, I mean the note will appear right beneath the original post. If that CNN host decides to remove the post, we would say, well, crowd-checking worked, right? So this is our key research question. We want to understand whether public noting can increase the chance of retraction. And our finding gives a yes answer to this question.
Misinformation spreads very quickly, as you know. So based on your research and other work in this area, do the current crowd-checking processes act fast enough to really matter?
Well, based on our data, I think so. Let me first give you one number. Among all the publicly noted posts in our data set, it takes roughly 1 day to receive it. Now, is it fast enough? I think the answer is yes, at least for two reasons. First, if the post is eventually retracted, then instead of hanging there indefinitely, that misinformation is gone for good. But even if that post is not retracted for whatever reason, merely having a public note right beneath it makes people think critically. Why? Because now people can see argument and evidence on both sides. So yes, cross-checking is fast enough to matter, I think. Would it be better if it's even faster? Absolutely.
And so in a media environment where misinformation spreads rapidly, what role should news organizations play relative to that crowdsourced correction on various platforms?
Well, first of all, I don't think we can get around traditional fact-checking. As I said earlier, it's indispensable. Twitter's community note was originally intended to complement, not replace, professional fact-checking. And Meta's decision earlier this year to completely replace fact-checking with crowd-checking is controversial, to put it mildly. So I think journalists should continue to lead the mission of bringing more facts and objectivity into public discourse, but not only through traditional fact-checking, also on crowd-checking platforms. By the way, I think it would be really nice if the fact-checking industry can help train potential writers and raters of community notes. After all, both traditional fact-checking and crowd-checking are working towards the same goal of bringing down misinformation.
You're lecturing at a business school, and it's interesting that a number of the National Press Club members and listeners of this podcast are communicator members, so they're public relations practitioners. And so I'm curious as to your perspective from a business viewpoint on the lesson here for organizations and individuals regarding, reputation.
Well, I used to say in my classroom that the rise of social media customer service raised the bar for customer service. Now, with crowd-checking, I think the bar for public relation management, especially on social media, is also much higher. But I suppose that's a good thing, right? So make sure your content is crowd-checking proof, or you might be caught out.
Yeah, so to that point, have you observed any unintended effects such as emotional backlash or moral outrage in reply to these crowd fact checks that, perhaps journalists in particular should be aware of when reporting on these systems?
We didn't observe any such example, but I suppose we want the corrective note to be objective and polite. That way, the debate is more civil, and the author is more likely to retract, if warranted, instead of digging in.
If you could advise social media platforms or policymakers on transparency standards for these community fact-checking systems, what would be your top recommendations?
I would give two. Number one, make the algorithm open source. And number two, release the data to the public. Why? Well, it's all because of reproducibility. This is the best and probably the only way to win public trust in the long run. And public trust is really the cornerstone in our fight against misinformation.
And how do you see your findings influencing journalistic practices around misinformation reporting and fact-checking, especially in such a polarized environment that we're in right now?
I think it's very encouraging. I certainly hope that our research will encourage journalists to play a more active role in crowd-checking, whether as note writers or as note raters. Because as we showed in our study, crowd-checking can actually work.
So finally, what's your message for individuals who prioritize either the First Amendment and the rights that are associated with that, despite the risks, or those who see really an urgent need to stem misinformation at its source in order to protect democracy?
I've been thinking about that question for a long time. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I think that's a false dilemma. We could and should have both. Forcible removal of content is almost never the best option. Voluntary retraction by the author is more viable in the long run. We just have to come up with the right design and have enough people to participate to make it work. And I am hopeful of that.
Huasha, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks again for having me.
Huasha Ray is a professor at the University of Rochester's Simon Business School. For Update 1 here in Washington, I'm Adam Cano.
You have been listening to Update 1, the official podcast of the National Press Club, the world's leading professional organization for journalists and a vigorous advocate of press freedom worldwide. If you have any questions or comments about Update 1, send an email to update1podcast@gmail.com.